Hello, I'm Stephen Andrew Missick, and welcome to this episode of Voice of the Word. And in this program, we're going to be talking about the Assyrian prophecy. With everything going on in the Middle East, people try to look for a way to understand the events. And Jesus told his disciples to watch for the signs of the times. There is a prophetic sign that's clearly recorded in the Bible that shows what God is going to do in the Middle East. But this is an important but overlooked prophecy. It has been referred to as the Assyrian prophecy.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
I want to look at an important passage of Scripture that might be seen as obscure and that is often overlooked. And this is the prophet Isaiah, chapter 19, verse 25. It says here, starting at verse 24, "That day Israel make a third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing at the center of the world. And Yahweh Sabaoth will bless them with these words. Blessed be my people Egypt, Assyria my creation, or the work of my hands, and Israel my heritage, or mine inheritance." Many Christians look at the Middle East through the prism of Israel and through the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But God's work in the Middle East is wider than that. I've had the opportunity of traveling extensively around the Middle East, and I want to look at these three nations. First, it says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people." And currently, Egypt is about 10% Christian. And a lot of people are unfamiliar with Middle Eastern Christianity. And recently they've heard of the Coptic people, the Copts. And they think that's a term for all Arab or Middle Eastern Christians. It's not. Coptic refers specifically to Christians of Egypt and to the Coptic Orthodox Church. Basically, the word Copt is another way of saying Egyptian, and it refers to Egyptian Christians. Now, the Coptic Christians in Egypt are obviously, they're Arabic speakers, but they use the ancient Egyptian language in their religious services. So this is the Coptic Christian community. And we know that God used the Egyptians in ancient times. Abraham went into Egypt. Israel became a nation, in a sense, in Egypt. Jeremiah was taken to Egypt. Even Jesus went to Egypt. It says, out of Egypt, in fulfillment of the prophecy, out of Egypt I have called my son. So I've been to Egypt several times visiting with the Coptic community. And when we study church history, unfortunately we have this Eurocentric perspective on church history. And we look at the Western Christendom model. And that's a good model. A lot of great things came out of the Western Christian model. That expression of Christianity. But God's work through the church is not restricted to the Catholic and Protestant churches. God's work is bigger than that. And the Church of Egypt actually gave us the Bible. The first list of the canon of the New Testament, it came from Egypt, from Bishop Athanasius. And also, the oldest Bible manuscripts we have are from Egypt. And Egypt has millions of Christians, and is around 15 to 20% Christian to this day. Now, they do face persecution and discrimination there, and there have been many Coptic martyrs. But another important thing about the Coptic church tradition, Christianity came to Egypt through St. Mark, the evangelist. He's considered the first bishop or patriarch, but the Coptic church spread down into Ethiopia and what is today Eritrea. So we have the Coptic and Ethiopian churches representing the Coptic church tradition. And we all know about Israel, and right now we see a conflict in the Middle East. We've seen it since the formation of the State of Israel. And it seems to me a lot of people are disputing this right now. I'm not saying that Israel can do no wrong. And as friends and allies of Israel, as evangelical Christians in America have been for a long time, dependable friends and allies, we need to hold Israel accountable, because there's been reports on attacks on churches this past week. There's a place called Taba outside of Ramallah, which is a Christian city, that radical Israelis went in there and tried to burn the village down. They desecrated a cemetery and a church, started a fire. And then we had a church in Gaza, a Catholic, the last remaining Catholic church. It might have been an accident, misdirected fire, we don't know. But Israeli forces struck this church and killed 3 people. So we should be very concerned about that. Israel depends on the friendship with America and evangelical Christians, and we should hold Israel accountable, that the rights of Israeli Arabs and Palestinian Christians and the Christian community of Israel and Palestine are respected. But I do not believe that Israel is an accident of history. I believe that in fulfillment of prophecy in these last days, Israel was reconstituted as a nation again, just like the prophets of old foretold. It happened, and it's humanly impossible, but I think God did this as part of his sovereign plan. So we've talked about the Christians of Egypt, and we've talked about Israel. And I want to talk about that more in another episode, looking at Israel. But now let's talk about the Assyrian people. The Christians of Mesopotamia are the Assyrians. And the Lord says in that last day, he's going to bless Egypt's Coptic Christian community. That's obviously what it's referring to. His people in Egypt. God has worked through Egypt through the Bible account till this very day. And then we have Israel. And if you read the Bible, you know how God's worked with through history, bringing the Messiah as the King of the Jews, the Redeemer of all mankind, through the nation of Israel. And then now we have the Assyrians. But, Jesus spoke about the Assyrians, and he rebuked his own people. He said, on Judgment Day, the men of Nineveh, the Assyrians of old, will rise in judgment against the Jewish people of his time, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. But behold, one greater than Jonah is here. And Jonah was a sign of Jesus. Jesus said this. He prefigured the death and the resurrection of Jesus. As I mentioned, I've been to Israel doing archaeological work and visiting the holy sites. I've been to Egypt visiting the Coptic Christian community. And I've been to Iraq several times. I went twice for the war as a soldier. And I went twice. Well, when ISIS was carrying out the massacres, I went over there to confront the issue myself personally. And then I went back again recently to visit Iraq. And in Mosul is Nineveh. And it's very interesting. These ISIS fighters, they claim that they honor the prophets of old. And yet they desecrated. They went to Mosul and they desecrated the tomb of the prophet Jonah, which Jonah went and ministered in Nineveh. And this shrine and tomb of this prophet was preserved there until ISIS, who were doing the works of Satan, even though they claimed to be submitters to God and carrying out God's work, they defiled this tomb. I think when they defiled this tomb, they actually uncovered an ancient archaeological site that was covered up over the centuries. But I also went to Al-Qush, and I went to the tomb of the prophet Nahum, who these prophets also prophesied about the Assyrians and about Nineveh. So God's worked with the Assyrian people. And something else that's very important and special about the Assyrian people is, to this day, they still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ. And beyond that, we have the important historical legacy of what used to be called the Nestorian Church. Now it's more properly called the Assyrian Church of the East. And this church was founded by the apostles Thomas, Thaddeus, and another apostle called Mari. And they founded this church, and the Assyrian church was very evangelistically active. They carried the gospel to India, to the Mongolians, and to China. And all across what's called the Silk Road, there were churches where they worshiped the Lord in the local languages, but also in Syriac and Aramaic, and a dialect very akin and similar to the Aramaic spoken by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And there's many relics, ancient cemeteries, even churches, ruins of churches still standing. But the combined forces of an Islamic warlord called Tamerlane and the Black Plague decimated the Christian church. So I think there's like nomadic tribes in certain areas of China, I think in the Ordos Mountains, where back in the 20s, people found these nomadic tribes still practicing some form of Christianity among themselves to this very day. But a lot of the churches over there have vanished. That's the only community I've heard of surviving, but those are just rumors and insinuations. So that'd be interesting if somebody could go and actually locate some of the Christian communities that are still there, if they still exist. But that's still a part of Chinese history, a part of church history. And they found a monument built in the year 781, erected by the Tang Emperor of China, declaring the gospel in Chinese and Aramaic. So the emperor listened to the gospel being preached by an Assyrian Christian missionary, and he bestowed his royal favor on this Assyrian missionary, and he commanded that churches be built and scriptures be translated. And in fact, archaeologists found not just the stone inscriptions, which we have, but also in Turfan, they found in a cave many Assyrian Christian writings in Chinese and other languages of that area. And they call these Assyrian Christian writings the Jesus Sutras. So let's look at this prophecy. Now we've explained who the Coptic Christians are. We've explained people know who the Israelis are, right? And the Jewish people. Let's look at the Assyrians. I've talked about briefly the historical Christian legacy of the Assyrian Christians, but let's look at prophecy. During World War I, everybody sees them, knows about this movie, Lawrence of Arabia. And, Lawrence of Arabia was getting the local Arabian tribes to rise up and fight against the tyrannical Turkish Empire. But actually, even though they haven't made a movie about this, the Assyrians also fought with the Allied forces against the Turks. And part of this was in a promise by the British. It's like, if you fight for us at the end of this war, we will give you an autonomous area, a homeland. So they fought for the British. They won a victory. And yet the British were more interested in the interest of BP, British Petroleum, than their promises and obligations to the Assyrian people. So instead of a map being created that represented the demographic realities of the Middle East, they drew lines to represent the foreign interest of England and France, and how they were going to exploit that region for its resources. And they literally left the Assyrians to die. And in Syria, the French did allow some Assyrians to settle outside of Hasaki in eastern Syria, but not all of them were able to do that, and they went back to return to their villages, where they were met with Iraqi army and Kurdish militia fire, and thousands of Assyrians were massacred. And yet, there's still like 2 million Christians in Iraq before the war that I served in twice. And now we have like 250,000 Christians left. And it seems hopeless. What happened? How come this large Christian community shrank so drastically? And one of the biggest factors in that, of course, was ISIS. And I want to just talk straight to you right now that under Barack Hussein Obama, ISIS was allowed to go wild. ISIS was allowed to go wild. It was open season on the Yazidis, which is a ethno-religious group, and the Assyrian Christians. And they were able to operate with impunity, going into museums, destroying ancient artifacts, going to historical sites, destroying them, going to Christian villages and killing as many people as they could and driving people out. I visited, when that was going on, I went over there, I saw what was going on for myself. It was horrific. And the interesting thing was, once President Trump took office, he destroyed ISIS in just a few weeks and put an end to their carnage. So why did Barack Hussein Obama allow those atrocities to occur with no consequence? He did it. He did it. So what about the situation now? So many Assyrian people displaced. A lot of villages I visited in Syria are now depopulated of Christians. What hope is there? Is the Assyrian nation going to face extinction? In the human way of thinking, it looks that way. It looks like within a few decades, no one's going to speak Aramaic anymore, and the Syrian national identity will disappear. That's the trajectory. That's where we're going. But it's not going to happen. It's like, how can you say that's not going to happen? Because God said he's going to restore the Assyrian people to their ancestral homeland and create an autonomous zone, a quasi-nation for them. That's what it says in the Bible. If God says it, it's going to happen. And if the Israelis can, the Jews are scattered around the world and they can go back and build a nation, then surely the Assyrian people can do it also. It seems humanly impossible, but with God, nothing is impossible. This divine prophecy will be fulfilled. And I want to honor, we have two, the Assyrian, there's a division in the Assyrian church. You have the Assyrian church of the east, then you have the ancient church of the east, which follows the old calendar. A prior patriarch of the Assyrian church of the east tried to modernize the liturgical calendar and bring it into alignment with the calendar used in the west. But there's a faction that decided to cling on to their ancestral customs and use the older calendar. And so Mar Abba, patriarch of the Assyrian church of the east, he is now in Erbil. And I believe the patriarch of the ancient church of the east, and I visited some of their churches when I was in Syria. He's gone to Baghdad. But what they're trying to do, these patriarchs, and God bless them for it, they're saying, you are not going to drive us away. This is our ancient ancestral homeland. We now have a global Assyrian Christian community. There's a large Assyrian community in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, and in St. Thomas founded the Church of the East in India. And now there's a European Assyrians, even in Russia. So it's ideal to administer the church from our ancient ancestral homeland. Now that it's a global church, as it has been in the past, when they had churches all the way from Baghdad to Beijing. Now they're even more global than they were at their heyday. But you have this idea that they're going to make efforts to maintain an Assyrian Christian presence in their homeland. And God's going to bless it, and we're going to see the Assyrian nation thrive and rise again. Because God said he's going to do it, and let God be true and every man a liar. I want to mention in conclusion of this presentation, 2 books. There's a lot of people are interested in Bible prophecy. You have Bible prophecy seminars. You have all kinds of Bible prophecy speakers and teachers out there. It's been a subject of great interest. And John Booko wrote a book. John Booko is an Assyrian American. I talked to him several times. He was a World War II veteran, and he's written several books. He wrote a book called The Assyrian Revelation, and he also wrote a book called Assyria, the Forgotten Nation in Bible Prophecy. I was talking to John Booko, and he was raised an Assyrian, and when he was as an Assyrian, he's raised an Assyrian, and when he was a child, he spoke Aramaic. So then, he gets to, goes to World War II, lives his life. He goes in the ministry, and he hadn't used Assyrian, and he forgot the language that he grew up speaking as a child. But he went and relearned Aramaic and reattained fluency in the language as he felt a call to that ministry. His son took over the church, and I don't think his son is interested in his Assyrian heritage for whatever reason. But this is a very good book that John Booko wrote. There's 2 different versions of it. And he also wrote an important book about prayer. And we also have Ron Susek, who wrote a book called The Assyrian Prophecy, where he's writing about what I've talked about today, but focusing not on Israel, not on Egypt, like I've mentioned in this presentation, but on Assyria and God's plans for the Assyrian people and who they are. Actually, the Assyrian people appreciate, because when you talk about Assyrian people, say, well, what's your nationality? I'm an Assyrian. What's that? They talk about the Church of the East. I've never heard of it before. And so someone who's bringing attention to this matter, which is important, and the difficulties they face, and creating interest in it, and educating people, of course, Assyrian people deeply appreciate that. But it's a neglected field, but it needs to be studied. And there's a lot of important ancient literature in Aramaic, like I have this book right here. This is the life of Peter. It's called the Syriac Pseudo-Clementines. This is written by Jewish Christians. It's a story of, you can see the Aramaic text here. This is a translation by F. Stanley Jones, but this is written by Jewish Christians, and it's a story of a missionary journey of St. Peter. And we can see the Aramaic text here on this page. And I've written a version of it called The Lost Acts of Peter according to the Ebionite Jews. And of course, I've written articles about the history of the Assyrian Church of the East, and I've got several books, especially The Words of Jesus in the original Aramaic, where I try to introduce Aramaic and the Assyrian Christian heritage to a wider and more general audience. So in conclusion, you can check out these books by Ron Susek, his book on the Assyrian prophecy, where he's talking about the topics I'm addressing here in this presentation, and also a book by John Booko. Remember my books as well. And please, this is an important subject, and I have a friend that works with, she's Assyrian, and fell in hardships and, difficulties, and she is like, you need to get back into, doing your program and working with the Assyrian people and talking about this important ancient Christian heritage, the importance of Aramaic. So that's what I'm trying to do again. The challenge is I had a successful YouTube channel, and when YouTube and Google was doing all that censorship, I was deplatformed and canceled for the content you see in this program. I got canceled and censored for this, deplatformed. So I don't understand why, but it happened. And so I'm trying to build everything up from nothing. They took everything away from me. An audience that I spent years building up and creating content that people wanted to see, but the Biden administration decided they didn't want people to see it, and so I can't believe these things are happening in the United States of America, but it was. And another thing, I'm going to close with this. I went to Iraq, and I'm visiting with the local Christians. I'm talking to them. And they were talking about, I mentioned how Trump just decimated ISIS. And Assyrian Christians who fought with the militias, friends of mine that I met when I first went over there, he was telling me how that the Trump administration aided, I saw it myself, the Church of the Prophet Nahum, they had this big plaque that it was in English, it was in Assyrian, and it was in Kurdish. It's talking about how, America, working with the local Assyrian community, restored this important ancient shrine to the Old Testament prophet Nahum, who prophesied the Assyrian people. And my Assyrian Christian friends in that region were telling me that Trump brought aid and help and relief to the Assyrian Christians, helped them return their villages and rebuild their lives. And then once Biden took over, it was all gone. All the assistance that had been provided in the Trump administration dried up, was not available anymore. And they cut them off, they left them high and dry. And then you started seeing radical Shia Iranian-backed militias coming around and bullying and harassing the local Christians who were trying to stay there. So hopefully things are back to normal now. But I went over there, I talked to people who were experiencing all this. That's what they told me. And, there's all this controversy about Israel right now, and people are rethinking certain things, asking questions. Perhaps they should. But I have to say, another thing I liked about that President Trump was doing was the Abraham Accords, right? Bringing peace, bringing people to the table, having them hammer out peace treaties, and bringing peace and stability to that region. That's what the region needs. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." And I was excited about that, those initiatives, and I hope they continue. Because we need to engage the Middle East, and these local Christians should be able to live there in peace and be able to prosper in their own homeland. We need to have stability, not all this instability, war, and chaos. And in these programs, what I want to do at the end of every program is to have a type of an Assyrian lesson so that you can be exposed to and learn Aramaic, right? So when I give the lecture, I talk about history or some contemporary issue, a Bible study, about Aramaic, about the Assyrian Christian heritage. But I want to expose the audience to the Aramaic language. So what I'm going to talk about is Aramaic Bible movies. And I studied Aramaic for a long time in the history of the Assyrian Church of the East, and I really feel that God moved Mel Gibson to put out the movie The Passion of the Christ in Aramaic. Mel Gibson hired a Catholic Bible scholar, Catholic priest called Father Falco to recreate an approximation of Aramaic as it was spoken at the time of Jesus. And I think, that was amazing because you try to, everybody knows about Greek, everybody knows about Hebrew, and people just are in love with the Hebrew language, have a lot of interest in it. But sometimes when I talk about Aramaic, you encounter sometimes hostility or confusion. It's like, what are you talking about? What's Aramaic? People don't get it. And and people who are in love with Judaism, Jewish culture, and the Hebrew language, sometimes they have hostility towards Aramaic, even though it's an important, if you know anything about Judaism, Aramaic is also an important Jewish language. So these people show their ignorance, but nonetheless, they express hostility towards Aramaic. Or people who are enamored with Greek. They study Greek and they love the Greek language, and it's all Greek to them, right? Greek, 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 Greek. And it's like, what is this Aramaic? Jesus didn't speak Aramaic. Well, it's in the New Testament. Well, they try to explain it away because they're so enamored with Greek. But the movie The Passion of the Christ created international exposure to the and awareness of and interest in the Aramaic language. And I believe God moved Mel Gibson, not just to make that movie, which is a meditation on the life of Jesus Christ and his sufferings and death, but also to expose people to the Aramaic language. Probably in a way they had never been before. Because of Mel Gibson's movie, more people have heard Aramaic than when it was a living, vibrant language in ancient times, because that movie had such a huge impact. So I want to mention, actually, when I was in Erbil, I'll show a clip of this. The local Christians did their own version of the Passion of the Christ. I'll show a little bit of that as well. But we're going to look at a scene from the Passion of the Christ, and then there's the Jesus Movie Project. Around the year 1980, a movie on the life of Jesus is a theatrical release. I think Warner Brothers released it, if I remember correctly. But it was based solely on the Gospel of Luke, and it was filmed in the Holy Land. And it's called Jesus, the Jesus movie. And that movie has been taken and translated into probably almost every language on earth, including the Aramaic dialects. So the Jesus movie has been dubbed into modern Assyrian Aramaic, modern Chaldean Aramaic, modern Syrian Orthodox Aramaic called Turoyo, and even classical Syriac. And of course you have different Arabic. Arabic and Aramaic are totally different languages. They're both Semitic languages. There is some correlation, but they're different languages. But you have like Egyptian Arabic, Levantine Arabic, Gulf Arabic. They've translated this into, Chinese, every language you can think of. But they also translated it into Aramaic. So I wanted to let you see a scene from this movie, and the scene that I selected is Jesus praying the Lord's Prayer in modern Assyrian Aramaic. So you can find these videos on YouTube. So in lieu of a lesson But, there's a way to expose you to the language we're going to show. But as a way to expose you to this language, we're going to show some scenes from the Passion of the Christ in Aramaic and from the Jesus movie in Aramaic. And I'll throw a scene in from the Assyrian community in El-Kush as well, in their Jesus movie that they made in that region.
بابا بشمية باشم قدش شمو أتيا ملكوتو هاو الرزايو داخل بشمية وبرا هلا اللخمة سنقانا الديومة وشوقنا نخطياتا داخل وبخنا شوقنا الخطايين ولا موركا جرابا إلا فاصلا من بيشة
كملت مصر ما دبقيلة عم موثح شو راية تحش ديشع ليلة بس بوينا أذبخت ما قدر قشية حش بقوبا.
So, in conclusion, please like, share, and subscribe. I also want to mention I'm going to publish my doctoral thesis, which focused on the Assyrian refugee crisis, and that's going to be available very, very soon. So, thank you. God bless you.
Research, rescue, and restore. Help Voice of the Word and Aramaic Christian Ministries mission research the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times of the Bible. Rescue persecuted Assyrian Christians in the Middle East and restore Christianity to its original Semitic roots. For Stephen Missek's books, online giving, and other resources from Aramaic Christian Ministries, visit www.stephenmissek.com. Join us next time on Voice of the Word as we research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots.